Welcome to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York, mouth off at RockVox, rockvox.com. Having enjoyed an almost 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, Executive and Recovery Coach, Keith Greer.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for making the time in your day to sit in on this episode of The Helping Conversation. I've repeatedly said over our, I believe, 2.5 seasons that one of the joys of doing this podcast is that it has put me in a position to have conversation with a wide range of folk who facilitate some type of helping conversation, and that really was one of my goals. I didn't want this to simply be folks like me, coaches, clinicians, social workers, psychologists, the people most humans would think of when you use the term helping person. I wanted the conversation to be broader and deeper. But every now and then, it is just so much fun to sit down with one of my colleagues in the traditional helping world and talk about what is going on in the land of those that practice what many would call psychotherapy. So I want to give you a definition. I found this, I believe, at the American Psychological Association. Psychotherapy involves communication between patients and therapists that is intended to help people, 1, find relief from emotional distress, as in becoming less anxious, fearful, or depressed, seek solutions to problems in their lives, such as dealing with disappointment, grief, family issues, and job or career dissatisfaction, modify ways of thinking and acting that are preventing them from working productively and enjoying personal relationships. This definition went on. I really like this because people often ask me this. What is the difference between talking to a therapist and just talking to a good friend? And let me say, if you have those kinds of people in your life, you're blessed. Make good use of them, but there is a difference. So here are some differences. Friends may be able and willing to listen and give advice, but qualified and duly licensed therapists are trained professionals with specialized education and experience in understanding psychological problems. Whereas friendships are typically mutual relationships in which people take turns being helpful to each other, therapy is devoted entirely to your welfare, to the patient's welfare. Therapy is focused solely on the patient's needs for symptom relief, problem solutions, or lifestyle changes. And thirdly, in contrast to the mutuality, informality, and multiple shared interests that usually characterize friendships, therapy involves a formal commitment to meet regularly at a designated time, to talk just about the patient's concerns, and to continue meeting as long as doing so serves the patient's best interests. And I would argue, again, many of you have heard me say that one of the other drivers of this podcast is that very often folks do not fully appreciate the skill level involved in providing therapy to a cross-section of human beings, that it's not simply sitting over a cup of coffee, 2 friends at a Starbucks, one listening to the other. And here's another piece that is key. While many different kinds of psychotherapy have proved effective in helping people feel better, so we can talk about schools of therapy like cognitive behavioral, family systems, psychodynamic, Gestalt, etc. So all these different kinds have proven effective in helping people feel better, resolve problems in living, modify their attitudes and behaviors in constructive ways, and that there are many factors that contribute to whether a person finds success in therapy, and however you want to define the word success. There is one factor that research has shown over and over and over again as maybe the primary explanation for positive outcomes in therapy, and that is the person's relationship with their therapist. So given all of that, I have in the room with me somebody, a colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, who is an expert in many areas of providing therapy, one of which is her ability to engage people in the process. And how do I know that? Excuse me, besides the fact that I've just known my guest for a really long time, I know that because she has a thriving psychotherapy practice that often when I call her, she doesn't have room to take somebody I would like to refer. Now, that does not happen by accident. Just like every other industry, if folks in the industry who are experts in the industry are busy and have people knocking on their door and saying, I would like to work with you, that doesn't happen just because of some good marketing or something like that. That happens because people are brilliant at what they do, and that gets around. And people know that. And people decide, especially in the world of therapy, if I'm going to invest the time, energy, and resources in working with somebody, I want to make sure I'm working with somebody who the evidence is, as we talk about all things evidence-based on here, the evidence is that it's going to produce something positive for me. It's going to prove fruitful. So let me introduce to all of you today our very special guest, Kristina Rauscher. Kristina is a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in the Rochester area, and she has been providing individual and couples therapy for nearly 30 years. Kristina provides a unique approach that blends traditional psychotherapy techniques with spirituality, empowering her clients to not only understand the obstacles that come up in their lives, but to view them as opportunities for growth and evolution, all leading to the creation of a deeply meaningful life. Kristina received her bachelor's in psychology from the University of Rochester and her master's in social work from the University of Maryland. Please join me in welcoming in my good friend, Kristina Rauscher. Good morning, Kristina.
Good morning, Keith. Thank you.
So excited to have you here. It has taken a little while for us to make this happen.
Yes, it has. COVID aside.
Yes. And I am thrilled. Let me start by sharing one thing you need to know about how much I hold Kristina in high esteem. Kristina is a therapist who has worked with several of my family members. So I don't refer my family to anybody who I don't know isn't going to do some amazing work. And Kristina is the person in this area who has seen several of my family members as they have dealt with a variety of different things in their lives. And so I am, again, just thrilled to have her here. And so I will ask you, Kristina, as I ask all of my guests, to give us maybe just a quick synopsis of your journey that has you sitting here 30 years in to a career as a very successful psychotherapist.
Okay. You know, I'm asked that, Keith, periodically, and I've always wondered, how do I even tell that story? And what it boils down to is, as silly as it sounds, passion. And I've learned to say to people over the years, passion leads to success. When you can find the thing or things that you are most passionate about and you pursue that and you follow that calling, success will follow because passion is pure. It's not, you learn skills to support the passion,
right,
and you learn tools to make the passion work. But passion is something that's just inside of you. And I had the blessing of starting out my career at the Mount Hope Family Center in Rochester, New York, working with Dr. Sherry Toth and Dante Cicchetti. And I started at Mount Hope Family Center as I called a line social worker. I did home visits in the inner city. I worked with families who were at risk for out-of-home placements due to a variety of family struggles.
Right.
And I immediately fell in love with the work. And I was very blessed in that about a year and a half after I started there, they offered me a position in their attachment model. And I started working with moms who we were basically trying to study the impact of maternal depression on parent-child attachment relationships. And so I got deeper into the clinical work in that capacity and continued to just know I was doing what I needed to do. And then I got another opportunity, and they promoted me to their clinical coordinator. And I was doing more supervisory work. I was doing grant writing on some levels, securing United Way funding, working with the Department of Social Services for referrals, tracking referrals. And unfortunately, while it was an awesome experience and opportunity, my life passion just started to drain out. And I remember one day going to a very dear friend of mine at lunch and laying on her marble floor and complaining about my back itching. And she looked at it and she said, "You have hives all over your back. What is going on?" And she's very spiritual and grounded.
Yeah,
and she said, hives and itching, especially because I had them on my feet, she's like, it's a need for change. You got to move. And so I promptly went into work, and I thanked them for the enormous opportunities they had given me over 6 years. I promised not to leave them high and dry. I gave them 3 months' notice.
Right.
And then I went into full-time private practice.
Wow.
And it was the scariest change I've ever made. My first week in private practice, I had 4 clients. I had $70,000 in student loan debt. And back then, there were 2 primary insurance companies in Rochester, New York, and they were in a lawsuit. And so you couldn't get on or off the insurance panels.
Was that in the whole day of preferred care?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I could not get on any of the insurance panels. So what I did is I made a commitment to myself that for 1 year, I would cold call somebody. A doctor, a lawyer, a teacher,
like every day?
Parent, once a week.
Once a week, okay.
And I would meet with them and do a roundtable discussion, do a presentation at their lunch meeting.
Yeah, build your network.
Just to get my network going.
Yeah.
In fact, I think, Keith, that's how I met you.
That could be.
I really think it is. So I started doing that, and it was hard work.
Yeah.
I saw clients whenever clients needed to be seen. I was there sometimes till 9, 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
But 6 months later, I had a full practice.
Wow.
And I believe it's because of passion.
And it has stayed that way for 30 years. Mm-hmm. Yes, it has.
I'm very blessed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, those having similar experience of working in the agency world. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful work. Mm-hmm. It's grueling work.
Oh, yes.
And you're getting paid $1.25 an hour.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I think I was getting paid $1.10.
yeah, right. So here's the kind of related question, because I am, and I think you would agree with this, I am a very strong believer that it is not a coincidence that those of us who are in the helping world are in the helping world. Mm-hmm. So if we knew you as a child, and we got to hang out with you for a little while, what would we have seen either going on in your life, or ways of being, or choices you made, or where you spent your time that would have been evidence Christina's going to wind up in the helping world?
That's an interesting question. My parents used to always say that from the time I was literally about 2 years old, I would walk in a room and my parents would say, you knew whose lap you needed to go sit in. You knew who needed you to come to them. And that would be the path that I would saunter over to and climb up into the lap of. And as long as I remember, Keith, I'm just fascinated with people. Yeah. I'm fascinated with what makes people tick, what makes people happy, what puts people in a place of pain. Engaging with people was always something that just came very easily to me. My friend group, I was the friend of all types.
Yeah.
You know, I had popular friends. I had stoner friends.
Yeah.
You know, I just loved people.
Yeah.
And it probably became most evident and affirmed to me by the outside world, besides my family, my senior year in high school when we had senior polls and I was voted class friendliest. And I was so shocked. at the time and so honored because I didn't know that what I did had any special quality.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I saw that it affected how other people saw me.
Yeah. And in the incredibly complex world of high school, to be that person who can cross the cliques, that's saying something, right? That's a level of skill that I think in that moment as that kid, you don't think of it as skill, but that's some pretty significant skill.
Yeah. Part of it was aided, if I'm being honest, by the fact that I grew up in a very small town.
Okay, whatever.
So there was 4 kids in each group. I think I graduated with 72 people.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. It's still that being able to maneuver that world and be in and out of those different groups says something. So also, as you look back over your career, who have been some of your mentors? Now, those could be either real life people that you know in your life. A mentor could be some well-known therapists that you don't know, but whose work motivates you and fascinates you. Who have been those people that kind of are with you in the therapy room?
That's a great question. You know what? I've never been somebody who followed a particular modality.
Right.
One of the ways I approach my work is I go into every intake with a completely blank slate. I don't read information about a client. Yeah. They go on my portal and they fill out all the intake paperwork, but I don't even look at it. Because I want to be able to sit with them in that first meeting and be completely receiving whatever it is they're giving. Watch their eye contact, watch their body language, watch the emotions that flash across their face. So, ironically, probably the most influential people who helped me in that journey have been my closest and dearest friends.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly pushing me and they're constantly... I had 2 girlfriends, my dearest friends, oldest friends. One of them is named after me. Our mothers went to high school together.
Oh, wow.
And we've literally grown up together.
Yeah.
And the older one lives in Sedona, Arizona. The younger one is in Wheeling, West Virginia. And the younger one is visiting her older sister this weekend. And they called yesterday. And they were in the car and they're like, okay, we have a question for you. And they started to go into one of their marriages and why was this okay? And why was this the marriage they chose? And they immediately just put me on and engaging with them and just off the conversation we were having and listening to them and the questions they were asking. That's just how I form my work.
Yeah.
My dad was also another influence because he was in the helping profession.
Okay.
He started out as an engineer.
Right.
And then went to divinity school.
Oh, wow.
And then opened a very successful practice in the Canandaigua area for the latter part of his career days.
I don't think I ever knew that about your dad.
Oh,
really?
you didn't?
Yeah. No.
He had a
that's
practice
awesome.
in Canandaigua.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You know, it's interesting what you said about you want to go in with the people you work with and not know anything about them. Last week I was doing a training with a group of clinicians, and we were talking about this concept of when you meet a client for the first time, and they all work in agencies where a client would be referred by somebody else. Do you read all the information that comes with them?
Right.
Or do you just go into the room and start creating that relationship? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And it's scary to go in knowing nothing because you don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah.
But I really believe it's the cleanest way to connect with them and where they are at.
Yeah.
And not go in with our preconceived notions and our education and our family systems model.
Right,
and,
right.
you know, that will support the work down the road.
Yep.
But initially, I just want to get to know them.
Right.
Through their own perspective.
Right. I'll have to send you this link. I'm blanking on the woman's name right now. I actually found this video in preparation for this training I just did. It's a psychologist, and it's about a 9-minute video where she talks about the concept of not knowing. Right? That for us is helping people. How do we walk into the room in this place of not knowing? you tell me person that I'm going to be working with. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you meet a person you're working with for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot on here about this concept of how quickly us human beings make decisions about each other as to whether we are friend or foe, way beyond our awareness, how quickly that goes on. So what are some of the concepts that you think about, that you act on when you meet that person comes to meet you for the first time, first phone call, whatever, in the name of starting to create this space of trust and safety?
What I usually do, and anybody who's ever come to me in that context will know that the very first thing I ever say to them is that 99.999% of how helpful this relationship is going to be for you depends on the comfort with the person you're with.
Right.
If my style does not work for you for any reason, please speak up.
Yeah.
You will not hurt my feelings. You will not offend me. And I will do everything in my power to find the right person for you.
Right.
Because that is what makes therapy work.
Yeah.
And so usually that's how I start, which kind of puts them at ease.
Very much so.
95% of the time I have somebody say, oh, I hear you. And I was in therapy years ago and I was there for 2 years and I never got anything out of it.
Yeah.
But because they had gotten word that their friend went to this person and found them enormously helpful, they thought there's something wrong with me.
Right.
So I just have to give it more time. I have to try harder. I have to bring my walls down. I have to let them in. And no, sometimes we just have to trust that initial gut impression.
It's not a fit.
It's not a fit.
Yeah. I just find that, I guess I still find it fascinating how we do this with people in our lives, like do it with a therapist and we do it with doctors and we don't speak up.
Yes.
We don't trust our intuition that I'm with this professional. They could be a really nice person, but it's just not working.
Right. Exactly. And to be empowered to say that. And to not think that's disrespectful.
Right. But the key piece is not every professional will be as open to that piece of feedback as you are. Right? That you actually invite that feedback, you normalize that if I think people probably have had experiences where if you voice that, you get some funky reaction from the professional who gets real defensive about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why I think over time people learn to squelch that voice.
Yeah.
And to turn down the volume.
Yeah.
And to sometimes mute it altogether.
Yeah. All right. So first message in the relationship building is, if at any moment this is not working for you, speak up. We're good. We'll get you to who you need to be. What's next in the world of creating that safe space?
Then usually what I do is I say what brings people here is different for everyone.
Right.
So I don't have a formula. I don't have a procedure that I follow. What I would like to do is to just invite you to tell me what brought you here.
Yeah.
And I will say usually there is a precipitating event that makes someone say, it's time for me to call a therapist.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for me to talk to someone. So starting there might be the best way to kind of just lead into giving me a sense of who you are and what's brought you here. And I assure them there's no correct way to do this. Just talk. If I have questions, if I'm getting lost, I will jump in. But otherwise, just tell me a little bit about you.
Right.
And what's brought you here.
Right. In general, how easy or not easy is it for human beings to do that? So they're sitting with you at the first time with a helping person, and you're inviting them to tell me your story. And so what's your experience with that?
You know, honestly, I think if you think about it, what all of us human beings want more than anything in the world is to be seen.
Yeah. And
that's
heard.
all we want.
Yeah.
To be seen and heard.
Yeah.
And so I think when the space has been created to make it safe,
right,
they're permitted to pay attention to whether it feels right.
Right.
And then they're asked to tell someone about themselves. And I always say, if you're not comfortable starting with the problem, just give me a little bit of background. Tell me about growing up. Tell me about your family.
Right.
And it allows them to have to orient themselves to get started. And then once they get going, I usually, every once in a while, of course, you get a client where you have to ask questions.
Right.
It's hard for them to just free flow. But I usually look at that as just a product of maybe they're nervous or that hasn't been a safe experience for them before. I mean, there we go.
Right.
There's our first piece of information that's going to be helpful.
Right.
That when given an opportunity to just storytell, they freeze.
Yeah.
There's your first clinical piece of information.
Right. Maybe never been in a place where it's been okay to tell my story.
Exactly.
Right? Or people listen when I start to.
Or people get angry when I start to.
Right.
So, again, that's just helpful information.
Yeah. I'm in a training program right now for doing supervision for coaches.
Okay.
And so it's just been a wonderful opportunity to, given some of the reading that we've been doing, to dig back into just some of the basics of a lot of the theories that are out there. So psychodynamic and transactional analysis and Gestalt and systems and things like that. So, but I know in you and I talking before we came on today that you were saying to me that you don't follow, like you wouldn't identify yourself as a cognitive behavioral therapist. So talk a little bit about that, of what you do, what you've integrated into what you do, and maybe there's not a title, right, for exactly how you conceptualize yourself as a therapist.
It's funny that you asked that, Keith, because as you know, you asked for a long time to set up this podcast, and I'm busy. Call me in 6 months. And this is one of the reasons why is I get nervous. As much as I love what I do and I love to talk about it, this kind of environment historically made me nervous because I couldn't come on and very stoically talk about Gestalt therapy or family systems. Right. But what I've learned over the years is I've started to identify what my approach is.
Yes.
And the best way I could describe it is it's a blending of some traditional psychotherapy techniques with a spiritual foundation. And I'm always careful to say to people, when I say spiritual, I do not mean religious.
Right.
Okay? There is a need to honor everyone's unique religious journey. But when I say spiritual, what I really mean by that is that I have a very strong belief that things happen for a reason and that all experiences are an opportunity for us.
Right.
As painful as they might be, and we have to create time to honor that pain.
Yeah, right.
There is an opportunity in every experience. And I would take it a step further and say, I believe that each of us came here to fulfill a particular journey.
Right.
And that every experience we have, every relationship we have is all part of that journey. And so I like to take therapy and look at it as to help people answer the question, if everything happens for a reason, why is this happening for me?
Right.
Not to me.
Right. For me.
For me.
That's a key change in, right?
Yes.
The 4 and 2. That's pretty significant.
Yes. Because my experience has been that so many people look at therapy as how they've been victimized.
Yeah.
And I am not discrediting that there are true victimizations that happen to people over the course of their journey. And that has to be acknowledged and honored and respected and sometimes talked about to allow for some healing. But eventually the real healing happens when they can start to get a perspective of, this is a silly, silly example, but I love to share it because it kind of captures this concept. When my husband and I first started dating, we would have this playful banter. We would go back and forth, and I would say, everything happens for a reason. And he would say, well, most things happen for a reason at best. And I would say, no, it really is true. Everything happens for a reason. So one day he calls me up, and it's the middle of the workday, and he says, you're never going to guess where I am. I'm like, I assume you're at work. And he said, I'm at the hospital. And I'm like, the hospital? What's the matter? And he said, well, while I was delivering my route today, I got attacked by a pit bull. And I said, oh my God, I did all the appropriate. You okay? Do you need me to come there? I wasn't insensitive. And turns out my husband has multiple black belts in various forms of Kung Fu, so he's completely capable of defending himself. So he got a nip in the arm, and he had to get a tetanus shot. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't traumatic, that isn't still a hardship, but he was okay. So before we hung up the phone, I said, just remember, hon, everything happens for a reason. That was not good timing.
That was not good timing.
That was not using good clinical skill.
I can hear Michael right now. Right.
So he got upset. I apologized. I backed down. We got off the phone. The next day, he's on his route, and a woman comes up to him, and she's crying. And she says, I saw what happened to you yesterday, and I'm so sorry, but I also thank God. And he goes, what are you talking about? And she said, I was at home yesterday waiting for a very important phone call, but I also had to be at a very important meeting. And I finally decided I better leave or I was going to miss my meeting. And I headed out, and the phone finally rang. And in my haste to run in and get the phone call, I forgot to latch the screen door. And my 2-year-old daughter got out. And the pit bull was charging her. We all know how that story would have ended.
Right.
And she said, but you came down the steps next door and you distracted the dog. And so the dog came after you.
Yeah. Yeah, those stories give you chills.
Yes.
Right?
And the hard part for all of us as we journey through life is that we don't always get those pretty little fluffy stories within 24 hours.
Right.
That make everything all
We
wonderful.
don't get the phone call from the woman.
No. And so, but if we can go on faith that there is purpose behind it, and we can trust, and we can remain curious, that's the biggest thing. Because when you're curious, you're not a victim.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about, and I agree with you. You have to be very careful in this conversation because you do not want to ever dishonor or disrespect people's trauma and things like that. But I think we can say comfortably that a mindset of this happened to me, right? Like if there's a victim component to the to me, that's not a mindset that will ever move somebody forward. That's a mindset that keeps people stuck in that.
That's right. That defines you.
Right. And again, we can say that with great respect for people who have had trauma perpetrated on them.
Yes.
But in the world of change, of moving your life forward, of healing, right, whatever word you want to use, how does it, why did this happen for me? Brings that place of curiosity in. And how do I sit and I look at this and be curious about all different aspects of it, including the victimization part of it. Yeah. But what else?
Exactly. And the other piece, too, that I should state so that it's clear that I'm not in any way trying to disregard trauma.
Right.
Is that the majority of my work over the years has tended to be with couples and with adults that don't have necessarily gross trauma in their history.
Yeah, right.
And it's more like, why do I keep picking this type of relationship? Why do I keep winding up in this kind of job situation? Yeah. And so it allows for the spirit of more curiosity.
Yes.
Which is very different than trauma work.
Yeah. Very different. But that internal dialogue is the same.
Yes.
Right? The why me.
Yep.
Right? The why me. Or in my days of doing psychotherapy, I always found it fascinating, especially around relationships, when I just meet one unhealthy person after another. How does this one unhealthy person after another wind up in my life?
Exactly.
Let's get curious about it.
What's the lowest common denominator here, folks?
Yeah. And but also respectfully, how difficult a shift that is.
Yes.
For some people to make, whatever it is about either us as humans or I think there's aspects of our larger culture and narratives within our culture that come into that it seems to be, I'm going to use the word easier with quotes around it. I don't know if it's easier or more comfortable or whatever for people to stay in the space of it. Why is this happening to me versus
Yeah.
and then what would I like to do about this?
Exactly. And that's where the work begins.
Yeah.
When we have an ability to connect the dots
Right.
and know why we do the things we do or why we're attracting certain types, and then we make a conscious decision to determine if it's ultimately serving us.
Right.
And if it is, keep doing it.
Right.
If it's not, that's where therapy begins.
Yeah. So so I have a question for you as I've moved into the world of coaching. Because in coaching, I tend to stay away from the why question. And it's more about, okay, where are you today? Let's define that. Let's define where you would like to be and how do you start moving towards there.
Yeah.
So in your world, what's the benefit of asking the why question?
I think the benefit is that for many of us, especially in the more interpersonal parts of our life,
Right.
if we don't get a concept of the why or where it came from, I think it's a lot more mind-boggling for people to figure out how to change it.
Okay.
So and I always say to clients, I am not a therapist that thinks all the answers are in the dregs of our childhood. And therapy
Right.
is you coming in and we're going to dim the lights and we're going to lay you down on the couch and we're going to rehash
Right.
every It's a Uni conversation.
Chime a chime. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's a lot of value in that. But there is value in being able to understand how some of the early experiences formed our beliefs.
Right.
Formed our notions about people, about life, about our potential, about who we are. And then we realize it was just because this is what I was told or this is what I was taught. But does it have to be that?
Right. Right.
That's up to you.
Right.
You get to decide if that's going to continue to label you.
Yeah.
Or if you want to say, okay, now I have an understanding where that came from, but I don't know that I want to carry that image for the rest of my life.
That is such, I think for people who don't do the work we do, it's hard to help people understand for us how amazing those moments are when you see that light bulb go off over somebody's head around a certain narrative that they have lived by, and all of a sudden, you mean I can choose
exactly
whether to live by that another day or whether it was ever true or
exactly
right.
Because perception is everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say perception is 9/10 of reality.
Yep.
Yeah.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to jump back to something you said a few moments ago. You said, so this model that you if we are to call it a model that you practice has some components to it that are rooted in more traditional thinking around psychotherapy. So can you give an example of maybe a couple of those components that would fall? We could probably say most people who do psychotherapy probably do some of this.
Right. So we have to build the picture of how we got to where we are. So I'll give an example. What I'm going to try to do, bear with me, is maybe blend a few clients because I want to really being a small community, respect people's privacy and confidentiality. But a good example of this is I have a client. I have been working with her for probably 3 years. One of the things that we started with is that she had a really, really traumatic childhood and a lot of abuse on a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
And she learned that the best way to survive in this world was to be invisible.
Yeah.
And to draw as little attention as possible and to attract very strong people who will show her the way.
Right.
And as you can imagine, what that unfortunately led her to in her earlier years was a lot of really abusive relationships.
Right.
And so helping her understand it's not because you're weak. It's not because you're flawed. It's not because you're different than anyone else. You just never got the opportunity to get a sense of who you are and have people support it.
Right.
Have people cheer you on. Have people be excited. I can remember one time my dad said to me, and I thought it was the oddest thing. Of course, I was at that age where everything he said was foolish. But he said he was trying to get me to figure out what I wanted to do when I get older. And he said, I just want to know that whatever you choose, you have passion. And he said, if you want to be a garbage collector in New York City, and you can convince me that you will have passion picking up garbage, I will pack your bags for you. Right. I will drive you there, and I will bless you.
Yeah, right.
So that's how we begin to get a sense that we are powerful, that we are mighty, that we have choices, that we have influence. And so the first part of the work was just helping her understand how that got interfered with. And that was some of the more traditional psychotherapy, family systems, that kind of foundation. Then what we've moved into is, okay, so what this has done is it's really set you up to choose people who perpetuate that pattern.
Right.
Don't give you a voice. Get angry at you if you have a voice. Shut you down. Minimize you. Mock you in public.
Right.
And the reason in your younger years that was okay for you is it's because it's what you knew. Then through the individual work, she started to say, I don't want to be that person anymore.
Right.
Doesn't feel good. And it's going to limit where I can go in my own development. And so we started to work on what would it mean to have a voice? What would that voice sound like? What would that voice want to say? What could that voice say? And now we've transitioned the work into couples work. And thankfully, she has today a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
But again, we will still pick partners who we can co-create an opportunity to grow.
Right.
So if we're doing our work, I believe the versions get better and better and better and healthier.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're still going to have certain patterns we perpetually play out because it's our stomping ground for learning.
Yeah. Right. 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 Or I wonder sometimes if some of these narratives, self-tapes, whatever you want to call them, got created so early, right? At a time when we were not aware. And they are so difficult to shake. Sometimes I wonder about this with me. There's certain tapes in my head that I know don't always work for me. I'm also getting to the point at the age of 62 where I'm relatively convinced those tapes will be in my head till the day I die. Like the goal of ridding yourself.
Bingo.
Right? Not going to happen.
Thank you for saying that, yes.
But can I become more aware of when they go off, how they go off, with who, under what circumstances, and because this is where I think it always comes back to me, choice.
Yes.
What's my choice at any moment in how I act and the decisions I make and how I think and how I feel? And
yes. And that's the key. Thank you for saying that, because that is the most important piece. Our goal is not to get rid of any of it. A lot of it we can.
Yeah.
It's just in the fiber of our being. It's in our cells.
Yeah.
But yes, you can create more awareness and you can make different choices around those circumstances.
Yeah, right. So you said earlier that in your conversation with the folks that you work with, I think this is such an important point, the differentiating between spirituality and religion. But I'm curious about even the spirituality part, because spirituality still has a bit of a bad rap, right, in the larger culture.
It's one or the other.
Right.
That's a good point.
Right.
People either are starving for it or even that is icky.
Right. Right. And yet we know, right, especially as differentiated from religious doctrine, the concept of spirituality is so healing, so comforting, so connecting between me and others, me and the universe. So I am curious, as you have that initial conversation, and back to what you said when we started, that, you let your clients know if we're not a fit, you say so.
Yeah.
Have you run into those folks who that piece, they just cannot wrap their head around this larger concept of spirituality?
I have had, actually, it was just a couple years ago, a client that did ultimately come back and say, I want to embrace this. I want to be able to relate, but I'm not.
Yeah.
It's not working for me.
Yeah.
And again, that was, to me, in a way, the work was accomplished even there.
Yeah, right. Brought
because
clarity.
she could come back and say that.
Right, right.
And she could say, I have to take myself on a different path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, everything's about bringing clarity into the room. Even if clarity is, this is not the room for me.
Right.
It's clarity.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. And as you know, because of the kind of work we do, and clients refer clients and friends refer friends. And so the majority of people I have found do kind of connect with that mindset.
Right.
But I'm sure it's just a subset of people that my practice has attracted because of where my referrals come from.
Right, right. If I've worked with you and had a really good experience with you and I know what you're about, I'm probably not going to refer somebody to you that I'm thinking, that person's just not going to be able to wrap their head around.
Road.
Right,
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, but let's not minimize the power of that concept, right? Of that spirituality concept. Yeah.
It's especially exciting when you look at couples work.
Yeah.
You know, because we all have this notion when we're coming of age and we want to find the love of our life, and we have these false ideas that it's supposed to be like the fairy tale.
You mean it's not?
It's not. Earthshock. And people know that intellectually.
Yeah.
And yet everyone is still secretly looking for it.
Right.
And they're hoping they'll be the lucky exception.
Yeah.
And they're going to find that person that is their second half.
Right.
And one of the things that the reasons I love to do couples work is we get to shatter that and take that pressure off the table.
Yeah.
We pick partners consciously and subconsciously because they are going to help us grow.
Yes.
And so I always say to people, there have to be two qualities present going both directions in a partnership for the desire to happen that they want to pursue it.
Right.
There has to be qualities that challenge each other to grow.
Yeah.
And there has to be qualities that heal one another. Okay? So if either of those energies are missing for either side, it won't ever get off the ground.
Right.
Okay? But because we know that's what's required, the love part is the part that heals. And that's the easy part. That's the first phase of a relationship where you just see everything about them that's going to heal you.
Yeah.
They're going to fill some void that you've never. Exactly.
The harps and right.
We can sleep when we're dead.
Yeah.
We just have enormous energy. That's the fun part. Okay. But as we all know, it doesn't stay there.
Yeah.
Because eventually, to keep the chemistry alive, we have to also challenge each other to grow.
Yeah.
And that's the hard work.
Yeah.
And there's no denying that there are times when what two people have created and co-created is just not healthy.
Yeah.
And it needs to end.
Right.
That's
Right.
goes without saying.
Right.
But for the majority of people, there is just this disillusionment that when the fuzzies go away, that now it's broken, it's wrong, I made the wrong choice. And what I tell couples, the very first appointment, is I say, you need to know I have zero attachment to whether you make it or not.
Right.
Zero.
Right.
If I'm doing my job effectively, I'm going to help you guys understand why you picked each other.
Yeah.
And what you are being challenged to learn from each other. And then you guys get to decide if you want to carry that on or if it's time to end it.
Which is so, in and of itself, you're describing treating your clients with full autonomy.
Right.
Right? Which is so adult at the end of the day, right? This is your call, your relationship, your
I don't
world.
have an attachment.
Right.
I don't know what's going to work for you because my lens is different.
Right.
What's going to work for me wouldn't work for you.
Right.
And vice versa.
Which I also would imagine maybe early on in couple work, the challenge of a couple walking in, struggling with each other, and each one wanting you on their side.
Bingo. Yes. And one of the things that I do...
Can I hire you to take on my partner? Right.
And one of the things that I do right away, and sometimes it's hard because, as you know, what brings them in sometimes is maybe an affair or something really painful. And what I say is that with all due respect, there are circumstances that brought you here. And those circumstances need to be heard, addressed, dealt with. But in order for this to ultimately work, what I need from each of you is a commitment to roll up your sleeves and to recognize not only how you were maybe betrayed or hurt, but what your part in it is.
Right.
Because if you can't both come here and say, I am 50% responsible for whatever we have co-created.
Right.
Then we won't get to a favorable outcome.
I'm thinking that's got to be a very challenging moment, potentially a moment where, especially if one of the partners in the room, the reality is my partner did perpetrate hurt on me, like an affair. That's got to be a moment where that partner wants to get up and walk out. Because I didn't ask for this. I didn't do this.
Exactly. I didn't go out and cheat.
Right,
I didn't. I was at home cooking and taking care of the kids or whatever. Yes. And so it is. But yeah, I will still hold firm.
Yeah, it's the truth.
And it is the truth that there still is a dynamic that you co-created that over time led to the outcome that happened.
I would also imagine that this is a both and. So we can do there's a piece of co-creation here and, hey, partner who stepped out of the relationship, not okay.
Not okay, and you've got some work to do.
Right.
And there's going to have to be 100% accountability, and you're going to, so if they can stick with it, they see that I always balance it.
Yeah.
Nobody gets off the hook. Nobody. But
but you're also not on anybody's side.
I'm not on anyone's side. Exactly. And I will always say, if you don't do this work, I said, here's the one thing, unfortunately, I'm afraid I can guarantee you. And some people decide this isn't the right time and place to do the work, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I say, if and until you do your own work to understand your part in a dynamic, you're going to recreate a similar outcome. Call me in 5 years.
Yeah.
And we'll get back to work because you'll be in a relationship with Betty, and Betty's going to look just like Sandy looked. Little different because she's her own person, but the themes won't change.
Yeah. It's just so fascinating for us human beings how we want the answers to our unhappiness to lie in somebody else.
Yes.
Right? We just want it. We just want, if that person was different, I would be happier.
Right. And I would be okay.
And I'd be okay. And it's false. It's just patently false.
It is. Exactly. And if you had that, I'll take it a step further and say to people, if you have that, let's say I have a magical place, okay? And I can find the person that is your everything.
Yeah, your soulmate.
And if you go to this location at this time and look for the person with the purple top on, that'll be it, okay? Even if I took every single quality you thought you wanted and needed, okay? One of two things is going to happen. Either you're not going to have those two qualities,
right?
The healing and the challenge to grow, which means they will be a wonderful person, but they won't be right for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Or you will fall for them, but the work is still going to come up because that's what's required to keep it going.
Yeah.
And we want a healthy version of work, and we want it.
Right.
But we're all here ultimately to grow and expand.
Yeah.
And if we think about it, as unpleasant as it is, we don't grow when we're comfortable.
No, not at all.
Right.
It's being a human being.
I know, it's tough.
It is freaking challenging. And then being a human being, trying to be in a relationship with another human being. Oh, my Lord.
And then be a human being trying to have a relationship with another human being and bringing new human
beings into the world. Yes, right.
Just keeps getting thicker and thicker.
Right. I always think, and I've had this conversation with both of my children before, the concept of limerence, right? Like how much we want, again, that, I remember that feeling when Carol and I first met. Like you walk into the room and it's instant arousal and it's, oh my God, and I can't. And that, to think that's going to last for 30 years, 40 years, exactly like that, every second of every day.
Exactly.
Ain't going to happen.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
And really helping people know that at a deeper level, not just in a theoretical level.
Right.
But to help them see how your growing together becomes the new love story.
Right.
I can remember when Michael and I first got together and it was a Sunday afternoon. And I always tell the story. Back then he had a job where he basically only had Sundays off.
Right.
And so it was in the fall and we were going to be going Christmas shopping that day. And so we were trying to get out of the house and it was a good morning. Everybody's in a good mood. It's all fine. And right before we were ready to walk out the door, the phone rang. And it was my aunt calling to say that my grandma had fallen and broken her hip. And she said, I don't want everybody coming to the hospital. We have a huge family. We would have overtaken the hospital. So she said, just if you could get the word out, let the family know what's going on, and then keep your phones with you.
Right.
And if I need you, I'll call. Okay. So I start the phone chain, start calling everybody. And while I'm doing that, I hear Michael upstairs cleaning. Okay. And he is vacuuming, doing different things. And at one point he comes through the kitchen and he said, I said, thank you so much for being patient. I'm almost done. Give me another couple minutes and we'll be out of here. And he said, no problem. And while you were busy doing that, I started the cleaning so that we don't have to do it later. And I said, I heard that. Thank you. And he goes, and I'm going to make you dinner, but it's a surprise, so you can't ask what it is. So he goes over to the freezer and he opens up the freezer and he takes out chicken. And now I always buy chicken in the big packages and break it down into meal-sized portions. Well, for some reason, this package never got broken down. So out of the freezer comes 18 chicken breasts. Okay. I innocently say, we probably don't need all that chicken for the two of us. If you want, while we're out and about today, we could stop and get a smaller package of chicken.
Right.
He says, never mind. It was a stupid idea anyways. Forget I ever offered. Opens the freezer, throws the chicken in the freezer, slams the freezer door, and storms out of the kitchen. Okay? This is an exact example of what I'm talking about.
All right. He
grew up in a family. He was the last born by many years.
Yeah.
He always felt like the lost child.
Yeah.
So he hears criticism easily. Anytime, and his family's Italian. So anytime he said what he wants, someone was, what the hell you want that for? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So he heard criticism.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family where you had to be right. And if you weren't, that's what cost you.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the potential right there for a huge battle.
Right.
Because he heard me being critical.
Right.
And I had to prove I was right.
Yeah.
That was wasting chicken. Okay. Now, because we had started our journey and we're doing our work, we could very quickly resolve that. And I was able to say, oh my God, you heard me being critical.
Yeah.
And I am so sorry. I did not intend that. And I am fully confident that you can figure it out. And I would love if you'd still make me dinner.
Yeah.
And he could say, I overreacted.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah.
It's reasonable. Let's stop today and get a smaller bag of chicken.
Right. So there, I think, are two examples of those narratives in your head that, would you agree, both of you are going to die with those narratives in your head?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not.
He's always
right. They're not going to go away.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
But we've learned to tame them differently.
Yeah.
Or we've learned to challenge each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you can say, hey, I think you're being, maybe could you give that some thought?
Yeah. Yeah. I always think with Carol and I, that this is one of the ways I've come to frame our 36 years, almost 37, 30, almost 38 years together now. I have no doubt what I was, along with all of the other things you're attracted to and truly loving your partner, certain aspects of her that I was attracted to. Mm-hmm. She's precise. Mm-hmm. She's a detail-oriented person, right? All things I'm not.
Right.
Right. And I'm assuming it's vice versa too. Mm-hmm. But I've come to view our relationship in 3 phases. So there was the first Limerence phase. Like she's probably a significant reason I even graduated from undergrad is because to go out with her, I needed to be willing to do schoolwork.
Right.
Because she was a straight A student, right? And I was going to go out with her. And so there's this part in our life and our marriage where I see these differences in us attracted us, liked it. Mm-hmm. There's this middle part where those differences drove each other crazy.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right? Drove each other crazy.
Yep.
And now we're in this part where I think of us as 2 puzzle pieces, right? That we just fit. Yeah. We fit.
And you accept each other.
And we accept each other, and there's differences, and we're each other's best friend, and we still drive each other nuts. Yeah. And, like the whole package is the package.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. That is a great illustration. And that's exactly how it works. Yes.
Yeah. Christina, thank you so much. I'm so glad we figured out how to make this happen. This was a wonderful conversation. Before COVID hit, just so you know, on some semi-regular basis, Christina and I get together for a cup of coffee or lunch and catch up. And obviously, COVID has gotten in the way of that. And so this was wonderful. Thank you.
Was.
Thank you for making the time. So I hope everybody found that conversation as enjoyable as I did. And maybe, again, gives you a little bit different of a take on what being in therapy could be. And I know that I so relate to Christina talking about putting together some different aspects into, again, I don't even think she'd call it a model, just how she does what she does. Because I think of that in how I do what I do as a coach, of bringing in, even, I think for me, as I think about this, some of my experience in the therapy world and in the family therapy world, of bringing that into my work as a coach. While some coaches would say maybe that doesn't belong there, it does for me. It works for me, and it helps me think about how I think about people. So if you are someone who has considered doing some work with a therapist, go out, check it out. Heed Christina's words that you make sure it's a fit for you. Don't be worried or nervous about voicing that, but find that person who can help you maybe rearrange a little bit of your story. So I thank you for making the time to sit in with us today, and I hope that you will join us as we continue in the next episode to shine a light on the skill and talent of those individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the helping conversation. Have a great day, everybody.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the helping conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.